Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. It is True Crime Tuesday yet again, and today we will be talking about the Candyman, aka the man who killed Halloween. Ronald O'Brien was born on October 19th, 1944 in Houston, Texas. He lived there with his wife Diane and their two kids, 8-year-old Timothy and 5-year-old Elizabeth. Now, Ronald was your typical good guy. He worked as an optician at Texas State Optical in Sharpsville and was also in charge of their local bus program. He was loved in his community as he was also a deacon at the Second Baptist Church where he also sang at the choir. And on the surface, Ronald really did seem like your normal family guy. However, that all changed in Halloween of 1974, when Ronald took his two small children out trick-or-treating in a Pasadena neighborhood. Along with them also came a neighbor and his two children. Now, the group had so much fun collecting candy from different houses, making the children giggle with excitement, until they reached a large and seemingly empty house. Now, the kids still tried to collect candy from this house. However, after a few minutes of not getting a response, the four children and the neighbor then decided to move on to a different house, while Ronald, on the other hand, decided to stay behind and wait. A few minutes later, he was able to catch up with the rest of the group and handed the children 1 pixie sticks each, telling them that if only they had been patient enough, these 21-inch pixie sticks would have been handed to them personally. And according to Ronald, someone eventually answered the door and handed him 5 pieces of the said candy. A few more hours later, they all grew tired from walking around this large neighborhood and decided to head home for the evening. And once they got home, the kids asked Ronald if they could eat some candy. He responded to them by saying, "Sure, but only 1 piece each." 8-year-old Timothy then grabs a pixie stick and asks his dad to help him open it up. Now, once this was opened, Timothy ate it right away and started to complain that it had an awful taste, but still decided to finish it anyway. Ronald then gave him some Kool-Aid to help with the bitterness, and after this, Timothy seemed fine. Around this time, someone also knocked on their door, and upon opening it, Ronald then saw a 10-year-old boy who went to the same church as they did. He then hands this little boy the extra pixie sticks, and after thanking Ronald, this little boy went along his way. Now, a few minutes later, Timothy starts to complain that he wasn't feeling well. And this is when he told his dad he had a stomach ache before running to the bathroom where he started vomiting. Ronald then comes to check on Timothy, and this is where he found his son on the floor, convulsing. Now, 911 was called immediately, I'm guessing by Diane, the wife. However, before the ambulance even arrived, Ronald felt Timothy going limp in his arms. And before even reaching the hospital, poor Timothy died in the ambulance. He was only 8 years old. Now, of course, news about this instantly spread like wildfire, making the parents take away all of the candy that their kids have accumulated for the evening. And the very next day, all of the confiscated sweets were then surrendered to the police station for investigation. And although most of the candy didn't seem like they have been tampered with, exactly 4 pieces were taken into the lab for testing. These were 4 pieces of 21-inch pixie sticks that had staples in them. Yes, staples. And Timothy consumed the same thing. And if you guys remember, I told you specifically that Timothy actually asked his dad to help him open his pixie sticks. So, Ronald saw that these pixie sticks had staples in them, and yet he said nothing and still allowed his child to consume the candy. And of course, the manufacturers of this candy have these sealed using a machine and not manually by staples. So this seemed extra fishy, especially because police knew that poor Timothy died after eating the same thing. Now, lab results came out revealing that these pixie sticks were actually laced with cyanide. And when Timothy's autopsy results came out, it showed that the 8-year-old boy had actually consumed cyanide enough to kill 2 adults. So that's a crap ton of cyanide. And it seemed like Timothy really didn't have a chance of survival even if he was brought to the hospital on time. Now, the police finally decided to bring Ronald in for questioning and interrogated him on where he got these pixie sticks from. And they even went as far as taking him back to that same neighborhood in Pasadena where they went trick-or-treating that night. However, according to Ronald, he couldn't really recall which specific house it came from because it was dark and they went to so many houses, and that he didn't remember which one it was. Now, during Timothy's funeral service, Ronald was acting kind of strange. Instead of being sad, he seemed a bit angry because apparently he was very upset at his relatives who didn't stay up late to watch the performance of a song that he had written especially for Timothy. And although this seemed quite odd, people do grieve in many different ways. But at this point, the local authorities were starting to get frustrated. What happened to Timothy was an isolated case, and yet they couldn't solve it and had no leads. So they decided to bring Ronald in for another questioning, putting more pressure on him as he was the only one who could help solve his son's murder case. Now, he was once again brought back to the same neighborhood, and miraculously, he remembered the specific house. He pointed the police to the direction of this household, telling them the details of what happened that night. He had told them that the house seemed empty as there were no lights on, but he still decided to wait for a response. And according to Ronald's version of events, the door opened slightly, and all he saw was a hairy arm that handed him 5 pixie sticks. He said that the lights remained turned off, and that he never saw a face, but he was certain that this hairy arm belonged to a man. Now, once the authorities tried knocking on this home's door, they found out that the man who lived there was actually in his workplace at the airport, where the police abruptly decided to handcuff and arrest him in front of all of his colleagues. Now, upon questioning, this man stated that he was actually working on Halloween night and that the only people that were left at home were his wife and his daughter, none of which had a hairy arm. Now, according to him, they had turned off the lights because they actually already ran out of Halloween candy to give out and distribute to the local kids. And upon checking his work records, everything seemed to check out, and this man's alibi was solid. But the question was, why is Ronald trying to frame an innocent man? Was he that desperate to find justice for his son? Or did he have other intentions? Now, of course, police found all of this very suspicious. Even the fact that Ronald had decided to wait outside a seemingly empty house just to get some Halloween candy when there were hundreds of other houses in that neighborhood. So the authorities decided to look into Ronald O'Brien further, and this is when everything started to unravel. They found out that Ronald, for some unknown reason, had difficulties in the workplace. He had no issues in finding a job, and in terms of getting employment, he had no problem with that. However, he did have problems with staying in those jobs. In fact, Ronald had 21 different jobs within the last 10 years. Now, the authorities also discovered that Ronald O'Brien had a debt of around $100,000, and that his car was being repossessed, and that the home that he was living in with Diane and their 2 kids was being foreclosed. He also had multiple bank loans that he wasn't able to pay. And aside from this, he was also currently a theft suspect at Texas State Optical where he worked. Now, Ronald obviously had financial problems, but a lot of people do. Something like this isn't really uncommon, but the police did arrest him when they found out that he had actually applied for life insurance policies for his 2 small kids. In January 1974, these insurance policies only cost around $10,000 per child. However, in September of the same year, just a month before Timothy died, Ronald had actually decided to bump these up to $20,000 per child for no apparent reason. And even more suspicious, at around 9 a.m. on November 1st, the day after Timothy died, Ronald called the insurance company informing them of what had happened to his son, asking when he could claim the payout of $20,000. Now, a search of the O'Brien family home was actually conducted, and there they found a pair of scissors, and upon examination, these scissors had plastic residue that was similar to the plastic used in the packaging of Pixie sticks. And once news started to spread about Ronald being the prime suspect in his son's case, a few people came forward. During this time, Ronald was actually attending community college to get a degree, and one of his professors informed the authorities that Ronald would constantly ask him very strange questions regarding cyanide and other lethal substances, and that he seemed to have a fascination with poison. Another witness also came in saying that he worked at a chemical company, and someone matching Ronald's description had come in a few months prior, asking if he could maybe perhaps purchase some cyanide. This guy then turned Ronald down as he was an optician and had no business working with this substance. Up until now, no one really knows how Ronald got access to this poison. But on June 3rd of 1975, after 46 minutes of deliberation, Ronald O'Brien was found guilty of capital murder and 4 charges of attempted murder. And after an additional 71 minutes, he was also given the death sentence. And soon after this verdict, Diane actually filed for divorce and completely stayed away from her ex-husband, taking full custody of their now 6-year-old daughter, Elizabeth. Ronald was then taken into custody and stayed in Huntsville, Texas, along with other death row inmates who absolutely despised him after learning that he had murdered his own son for monetary gain. On March 31st, 1984, almost 10 years after Timothy's untimely death, Ronald O'Brien was executed by lethal injection while still maintaining his innocence. Now, reportedly, around 300 people came to witness his demise, and while he was dying, people cheered and yelled, "Trick or treat." And yeah, I guess that's where I'll end today's video. As usual, I would love to hear your thoughts on this case, and should there be any other case that you would like for me to cover on this channel, please let me know down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all on my next video.